Hello and welcome to another installment of Plagued by Visions. My name is Juan, and today we're gonna do some book reviews, but there's a very special sort of unifying theme to all of the books and something that I haven't done before. I'm going to be reviewing books that all come from the same publishing house or small press or whatever you want to call it. And this is a very special small press that I came across due to a good friend of the show, Rowan, over at the channel We Damage We. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you might recall that I reviewed a book called Amygdalotropolis by B.R. Yeager, which was a buddy read with Rowan, and that buddy read came about due to the fact that Rowan had previously read another book by B.R. Yeager, which was Negative Space, which I will talk about in this video, but that book was published by the publishing house that I'm going to be talking about, and on top of that, Rowan also did a video where he went over Dennis Cooper's famous queer transgressive authors, Dennis Cooper's list of favorite books from the year 2021, I believe it was, and some pretty bizarre and compelling stuff, as you might imagine, coming from the man himself, and a lot of those titles again came from this publishing house. And so if y'all know me, you know I love Dennis Cooper. I love what he's about, and if he's fucking with something, then I'm gonna try to fuck with it too, and that's how I arrived at all of these titles, basically. So yeah, thank you to Rowan for putting me on the right path towards finding this amazing small press that I've really fallen in love with. And the small press is called Apocalypse Party Press. They're a small press publishing house, whatever. I'm not really sure what the right terminology for it is. They're based in Philadelphia, I believe. And while trying to think of how to introduce them and trying to put words together that would fit best as a presentation of what's to come, I decided, well, why don't I let Apocalypse Party themselves do the introduction. So I will read to you the about page that you can find on their website, where they describe what they aim for, basically a manifesto of sorts of the kind of things that they publish, and it really helps set the mood for the kind of fiction that they are putting out there. You might describe us as a heavy metal acid trip via literature. We believe books are hallucinogens suffused with emotion, feeling, and sensation. Our books wobble in the frame of reality and dissect the prism of surreality. These books tend to be difficult to categorize under one banner, but together they form a kaleidoscopic mirror of an increasingly bleak world. However, we're far from hopeless. We like to have fun, thrive on absurdity, and believe in the power of art. We are a space for writers to explore their risky ideas in new and interesting ways. Anyone with an open mind is welcome to join the party. So come on, jump through this black hole with us. We promise it'll be one hell of a time. So the kinds of thematics that you might be able to glean from that. Of course, there's an almost sort of infatuation with this nihilistic, bleak outlook on reality and lived experience, and it's something that in my mind, all of these authors that I've discovered through Apocalypse Party, I've come to refer to them as like the Eugene Thacker Brat Pack. and I think that description is very fitting. Eugene Thacker is of course a famous sort of nihilistic philosopher slash media critic. I've talked about one of his books before, In the Dust of This Planet, which I reviewed in my nonfiction November video. So if you're interested in my thoughts in that, I'll try to remember to link it up there. Basically, his imagination sort of flirts with that final frontier of human cognition, or rather what cognition would be like without any tethering to humanity. The world without us is the famous adage that he coins. Of course, as you can imagine, tons of bleakness, surreal nihilism, this feverish delirium of abandon and the void, and that's the kind of thing we're vibing with here. But also, I think that the Brat Pack element really fits it well, as well, because what I've noticed is that there's, of course, as the about page itself describes, there's an element of fun there. There's an element of play. There's a textual play that goes on with a lot of these books, and it's not always this very sort of serious stone-faced nihilism and bleak ideology. I mean, that kind of thing is certainly present there, but it can certainly be exhausting and difficult to get through some of the titles that they put out. But there's that level of excitement and intrigue that's always sparked with the way that they play with text and form and ideas, and I found it to be a really quite an amazing little catalog of books that they've put out. Of course, I haven't read everything that they've put out, but everything that I've read from them, I've been very, very pleased with. And so, of course, I want to finally do them the courtesy of reviewing their work, because actually I read most of these last year with the exception of one, and it was like earlier in the year, so it's been months and months that I've been trying to review these, but you know how it goes. So finally, let's get into what Apocalypse Party has to offer. And of course, I go into it with that adage of, this is fiction that's most certainly not for everybody, but if you're already sort of vibing with the things that I've been describing, then you definitely don't want to miss out on this. And even if you're not, but if you're curious, like Apocalypse Party themselves say, if you have an open mind enough to try these kinds of more out there works for yourself, I'm not going to tell you to not give it a try. Okay, so the first work from Apocalypse Party that I'm going to be reviewing is Terminal Park by Gary J. Shipley. This is incredibly difficult to do a review of. One, because like I said, I read these quite a while ago, but also those anchorings and plot and you know, like the plot synopses and breaking down things like characters and themes that run throughout it. It's not something that you can necessarily do very easily for a book like this. The best way that I can describe it is it's kind of a series of vignettes, and these vignettes, as you might imagine, are unfolding in this kind of a apocalyptic panorama, and they're sort of being filtered through the, again, textual play of visual media. It has a lot to do with screens and film and television, that kind of thing. So there's that level of narrative detachment to it. But I think the most that I got from this was the grotesquerie behind the narrative. These series of vignettes, they do unfold in these very vivid sort of technicolor goo and slime and so on and so forth, which was quite a thing to behold as a reader. I will say, I mean, when it comes to more experimental works like this, what I try to sort of tether myself to in order to be able to enjoy it is the sort of more conventional genre hang-ups that it might have, and this very much reads like a horror novel in a lot of places, or a horror diary, a horror experiment, whatever you want to call it. So those are the elements that me, you know, someone that's a horror fan at heart, those are the elements that I latched onto the most. And I have to say, Gary J. Shipley does do a very fantastic and thorough job of constructing these grotesque set pieces of defilement of the body, of death, of ruin, of bleakness, and it's also suffused with a lot of theoretical threads when it comes to you know, certain thinkers that have also tackled some of the philosophical heft that's found here. I mean, Kristeva, Eugene Thacker, who I already mentioned. You know, with Kristeva, this is definitely playing a lot with that super ego junk heap of abjection that Kristeva talks about in Powers of Horror, for example. That world of abandon, of the worst sides of humanity through which we define ourselves. That's sort of what the narrative is digging its fingers through, and it's quite a thing to behold, but again, very hard to describe for me. And I'm not going to claim that I understood all of it. I'm not even sure if there's anything to understand, but I think that's sort of the beauty that I find in a lot of more experimental works of this kind, is that you know, with more conventional narratives, with more conventional fiction, it's about understanding the story. But in here, it's not so much an understanding that you're aiming for, but an experiencing of the series of whatevers that are being detailed in here, and the experience, the vicarious experience, the journey through the world that Gary J. Shipley constructs, that was very compelling, and I really did enjoy a lot of the ideas that he explores in here, but ultimately not my favorite, just because maybe I'm just not that used to more experimental works of this kind. I do still read, I do still have that terrible habit of looking for more conventional plot structures when it comes to my reading. But I approached it with an open mind, and I didn't entirely hate it the way that I thought I would. And with a little conditioning, or maybe a reread, like I said, it's been a while already, but I can see myself enjoying it. I mean, there was a lot of, like I said, media criticism that I found compelling, a lot of play with ideas. It's not so much about, like I said, a story, but a deliciously and decadently ugly kind of vibe, and that, which is the main thing that I got from it, that was pretty fucking cool. I gotta say. So yeah, Terminal Park by Gary J. Shipley. Definitely my least favorite out of all of these, but not bad by any means. Especially, like I said, if you're vibing with what I'm talking about, give it a shot, and you will find that he does have a sense for voice that is quite compelling, and you can see that he is a great writer. It's not so much that it's badly written, it's just very out there. It was too out there even for me at some points. But like I said, maybe a reread or something one day, who knows. But yeah, that was Terminal Park by Gary J. Shipley. So the next title that I'm going to be talking about is one that I actually received as a review copy, because I reached out to Apocalypse Party specifically asking for this, because this is a book that, again, Rowan from We Damage We reviewed and raved about, and I thought it sounded fascinating and right up my alley, so I just had to have a copy of it. And it was Bonding by Maggie Siebert. This was actually published earlier in the year. It was the beginning of February, I believe. But this actually came out in 2021, but it was picked up by Apocalypse Party and reissued and re-released. So that's the version that I have here. And Bonding is a collection of horror short stories. So I think out of all of these, of course, have horror elements to them, but I think this is sort of like the more conventional horror work that I have out of the bunch. And so, of course, when I heard that, I just had to give it a try. So Bonding is made up of these stories that in my review of Goodreads, I sort of described as being told with this nihilistic urgency, that there's just a constant cataloging of demises of all kinds. I mean, death, loss, loss of inhibition, loss of the self, but also loss of loved ones, loss of pets, and etc., etc. It's very much about those bonds, as I guess the title gestures towards, or at least that's my interpretation of it. Those bonds being undone, but also exploring the inherent horror in a lot of these bonds. I mean, with love turned into obsession, affection turned into anger, fatherly, motherly love turned into tragedy, that kind of thing. It's very compelling, and I think one of the things that I found most enjoyable about it is that, as weird and relentless and bizarre as some of the horror gets in here, everything is also very flushed with affect, and there's emotion that runs throughout all of these, and the character portraits that you find throughout here always feel like there's a level of care that's being put into their treatment, and it's not just meat puppets being splashed and bursted every which way, as it tends to be with a lot of weird horror, where the body is taken as this temple to be defiled. Certainly that happens here, but I felt like Maggie Siebert was also equally concerned with detailing the psychological sense of tragedy, of sadness, of bleakness, as much as she was relentlessly exploring death and putrefaction, etc. I found the stories to be quite enjoyable. Like I said, this is kind of like the more conventional of the bunch, but there's still experimentation in here. That there's some stories that are told entirely through disjointed dialogue, some stories that are told as if they're a kind of confessional interview, or in the format of a documentary, things like that. So there's certainly experimentation with form, but it didn't feel as cumbersome or as tough to grapple with as something like Terminal Park, for instance. Yeah, I found this really enjoyable. Some of the highlights in here for me were definitely Ammon, which I think was Rowan's favorite. It was this is the one that's told as kind of like a documentary piece, and there's these subtle flirtations with apocalypse and supernatural elements, and like I said, some of these read as bizarro horror, which is usually not my cup of tea. But again, there's a level of care in it that carried me throughout the stories, the way that a lot of bizarro horror often doesn't. I thought it was quite a phenomenal little book. I mean, it really felt like a refreshing take on horror, and that's one of the things that I found very beautiful about it, is that Maggie Siebert certainly includes kinds of storylines, tropes, archetypes that can feel derivative of the genre, but what makes them shine through, what makes them special, is the way that she twists and inflates and burns and maims them to befit the kind of affect and sensibility that she's trying to show here. And of course, taking something and making it your own is the right formula to go with when it comes to writing, I guess. And it certainly felt like that was happening here. With some definite misses in terms of I was just like scratching my head like, what was that? But for the most part, the story is very solid. I think they can be enjoyed by even more casual readers of the genre. So this is, I guess, a great introductory piece to the rest of the Apocalypse Party catalog, at least as far as the ones that I've read up to now. So as a piece, as a threshold into that weirder, more experimental world of this new frontier of horror fiction, I think that's a compliment. At least I'm delivering it as one. So yeah, I thought this was excellent. I thought it was very, very well written, and there was an assessment that Rowan made about it, in that the stories are so compact, but yet the glimpses that we get of the worlds that are being constructed in them are enough to make them feel vibrant and alive. And I completely agree. Siebert can do a lot with very few words in terms of vivid imagery, in terms of a fully realized set piece of chaos and mayhem. So definitely very good. If you're a fan of horror and you're looking for something that's a little more out there, and I know there's a lot of more conventional horror fans who watch this channel, definitely don't miss out on Bonding. So up next, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I have two books by the same author, an author who is published under Apocalypse Party, but one book is from Apocalypse Party. The other one, although by him, is not published under Apocalypse Party. But this author, Troy James Weaver, I discovered through exploring the Apocalypse Party catalog, but it led me to some other of his work, and the work that I explored outside of Apocalypse Party ended up being my favorite by him. And so I'm just really excited to tell you all about this author, because I've never really heard anybody else talk about him. But I guess we'll go with the one that's from Apocalypse Party. So the first one I read by Troy James Weaver is Selected Stories, which is a collection of short stories, so very, very short stories. In fact, Troy James Weaver was my first foray into the realm of flash fiction. And I don't know if he himself describes it as such, but I mean, it's very short fiction. It's flash fiction. And I've always been very apprehensive towards flash fiction, just because for me, I mean, the core principle of flash fiction being very, 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 very short fiction, in my mind went against the principles of what makes a good story. I mean, there has to be at least just enough developments. I certainly didn't think it could be done effectively in such a short amount of words. But I'd been ignorant. I'd been a heathen. and at least exploring the work of Troy James Weaver, I can attest that I am a fan of the things that he does with such few words. The stories in here all centered. There's no cohesive uniting them, unlike the other work that I'm going to talk about in a minute, which is what I preferred about it. But these sort of feel a little more disjointed. But of course, they're all unified by the themes of horror and despair and alienation, social isolation, loss, all the usual suspects that you're probably starting to notice are present throughout this entire catalog. But the short stories, I mean, there's something about the way that flash fiction works is that, of course, there's an urgency to get as many images out there as possible. And that labor certainly at times in here can just feel like throwing everything and seeing what sticks. But a lot does stick, and it is quite a thing to behold. And I mean, I don't know how else to describe it except that this format of flash fiction feels like a constant nibbling at your eyeballs. I mean, it's you basically fucking tear through it, and the series of images are so impactful, so effective, because they have that relentless urgency to paint some kind of vividness, some kind of devil in the details that's gonna be an affront to your senses, and I can see that exercise sort of pushing a writer's wits in terms of what can be done on a page, what can be done with a single printed word, and that kind of philosophy I do think that Troy James Weaver plays with beautifully and effectively, even if there were some misses. And as you can see, it's a very short work, so I felt like there was not quite enough in here to be as impactful, but what there was in here, that he certainly plays with this idea of death a lot, but death not as the end of life, but the element that sort of suffuses life in a way. Very bleak, horrid stuff in here that I found quite compelling at times. So after I read this, it led me to this other work by him, which is the title is not on the cover, but it's called Marigold, again by Troy James Weaver. And like I said, this is from King Shot Press. It's not from Apocalypse Party, but still, this is the work by Weaver that I preferred, because like I said, this had a unifying theme. It feels sort of there's an autobiographical element to it, definitely, and also the unifying theme is that these are all pieces of flash fiction that are sort of taking place within the same story. There's an overarching story, basically snippets of this florist who, I gotta say, has one of the ugliest voices in fiction that I have been exposed to in a while. And I know that might sound like it's an insult, but I mean it as much as a compliment as it can possibly be taken as. There's a brutal honesty here with the dissolution, and there's really a lack of florid padding of prose to sort of make this feel more like a literary work. It's highly unfiltered, very brief and punchy, and again, it's a series of sucker punches is the way that the flash fiction reads that. It's just snippets of his life, of the relations that he strikes with co-workers, with some kind of romantic interests that he has in his life, etc., etc. But as I said, it's the ugliness in here that did it for me. But even in ugliness, there's not a beauty, I mean, but there's a sophistication, there's an elegance to the way that ugly and brutal honesty can be presented that can make that form of narrative compelling, and even there's even like an aesthetic to that uncompromised kind of prose that I found just very compelling, and like I said, it's an honesty that you don't often see in fiction, And if Marigold did anything for me, it made me realize how many hang-ups are usually attached to fiction, to that filtering of reality, that sort of when you read something that's not littered with those kinds of hang-ups, it makes it very arresting and captivating and a bit off-putting. I mean, some of the things that our narrator here says made me go like, oh, what the fuck? But in the best way possible. I mean, it's just it's just something that you have to read. You know, the truthfulness of the human experiences is very ugly and uncompromising and sometimes cringy, sometimes cringeworthy and hard to deal with. It's all here, and I think that contrast with the floweriness of its presentation, of its premise, our main character being a florist, which I believe Troy James Weaver is also a flower salesman, so that's just a symbolic coincidence, but nonetheless, there's a contrast there between trying to make something out of a lived experience in the realm of fiction, but all that comes out is this unwieldy and off-putting sense of reality that, like I said, is highly absent in the realm of fiction. It was just amazing. I love this collection, and it's something that you can just read in one sitting, and I think I've already read it like twice. I don't think I've read it a third time, but I feel like I definitely will. Just because revisiting some of these snippets and just seeing the unfolding of events being told so nonchalantly, but also with so much power and subtle aggressiveness to it. Subtle aggressiveness, of course, sounding like an oxymoron, but it's what I experienced here, and I thought it was magnificent. I think Troy James Weaver is definitely a very unique voice in fiction that I'm now very excited to see what else will come out by him. So yeah, that's Marigold and Selected Stories. Like I said, I prefer this one, but this one was a good introduction. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I mean, it made me want to pick this one up, so there you go. And as I said in the beginning, here's the work that led me to Apocalypse Party in the first place, Negative Space by B.R. Yeager, which is most definitely my favorite Apocalypse Party release so far. And if any of you tune into like my community posts here on YouTube, or I believe I also posted it on Instagram, this was one of my top 10 reads for 2021, and I read this in December, so even that late into the year, I thought this is magnificent. Absolutely one of the best things that I read that year, and I read a lot that year, so that should tell you. This is a horror novel. There's the definite inspiration of Dennis Cooper that you can feel in here, but also something about B.R. Yeager, something about his narrative voice that I find so compelling is that he's so unabashedly in touch with modern day youth in a way that I really, quite tragically, have not read a lot of authors who treat it with that level of reality. It's basically about a group of aimless youth who are doing experimental drugs, and there's eventual chaos and death and suicide and that unfolds in here. It's more of an experience, a character study of several different voices and circumstances, and it's all told through again these very modern takes on narrative voice, like internet writing, like what we saw when I reviewed Amygdalatropolis, for any of you who might remember that. This feels like a more sort of a fulfilled and complete and fully realized version of the themes and the kind of narrative style that he was reaching out with Amygdalatropolis. I just thought it was incredible and highly original, compulsively readable. It's kind of like the longest of the books that I'm reviewing here, but you'll fucking tear through this, I assure you, because there's just something. It's not quite that thing of like it's like a train wreck where you can't look away, but it's more like a seductive brutality. It's a seductive void that really pulls you in. It's what I enjoyed the most. That B.R. Yeager really makes monstrosity and perversion and this highly unwell psychological exploration seem inviting and compelling and aestheticized in a very powerful way. I just enjoyed it so much. Like I said, one of my top reads of last year, and definitely B.R. Yeager is one of my new favorite sort of modern horror authors, and I can't wait to see what else he's going to do. Amygdalotropolis I liked, but this I absolutely adored. And if you're vibing with, again, the elements that I'm describing in here, definitely pick it up. It's incredible. Rowan from We Damage, we also raved about it equally. It's just a fascinating construction of the modern day human condition through horror, like this sort of not reinventing but advancing horror towards the year that we are in. What's horror going to look like? Where does it reside? Where does it fester? It festers in this increasing sense of bleakness and doom, and this increasing sort of being sucked through screens and virtual spaces, but it doesn't feel like it's aiming to be futuristic. It doesn't feel like it's aiming towards a sci-fi ground, but it's more like just accepting that bodiless and monstrously technological existence as just being the new human condition. And it's so compelling, so wonderfully told, and so original, so relentless. It was an amazing thing to behold, and I highly recommend this. Again, like with Bonding by Maggie Siebert, very much more gesturing towards the realm of horror, than something like Troy James Weaver, who has elements of horrificness to it, but this feels more like a straight up horror novel. But it was incredible. It was totally amazing, and my favorite thing that I've read from Apocalypse Party so far. So yeah, great novel. And there you go. There's a little taste, a little sampling of the apocalyptic and nihilistic and bleak horrors that await you if you decide to check out the Apocalypse Party catalog. Quite amazing, quite varied, but again, unified by that sense of a less savory kind of philosophy, but also it feels electrifying in the way that it explores alternatives to narratives and storytelling and printing techniques and so on and so forth. It's quite amazing. I mean, Apocalypse Party, I'm a fan. I'm totally looking forward to see what else they put out and exploring the rest of their catalog whenever the fuck I'm able to buy books again. So yeah, there you go. And let me know in the comments if you're interested in any of these titles, if you've read anything from Apocalypse Party, whether it be the ones that I just talked about or some others that you would recommend, or recommend me what are some other small presses or indie releases that you feel sort of fall in line with this, being more experimental, more unwieldy, but equally compelling ideologically or narratively. And I love horror, so if they're suffused with horror sensibilities, even better. So there you go. Hope you check them out. I will of course link the Apocalypse Party website down below, along with links of where you can buy these titles and support these wonderful authors who are really doing the labor of reinvigorating darker fiction in a way that I truly had not seen done before. So there you go. I hope you're all well. Continue to stay safe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.